Sleep is critical across the entire lifespan, and it's critical for mental health. It's also critical for physical health and our body's ability to fight off illness, our body's ability to perform physically, to be strong and active. All of that depends on sleep.
As vozes do professor.
أصوات المعلمون.
老師有話兒.
Teachers' voices.
Welcome to a new episode of Teachers' Voices, the podcast made of the stories of teachers around the world talking in their own words. I am your host, Nina Alonso, and in the years of producing this podcast, teachers from varied contexts, teaching different ages and subjects, have told me about children who are too tired in the classroom. Today, I explore the importance of sleep for learning, bridging, as we do in this podcast, science and practice. Educators agree that it is difficult for children to learn when they don't sleep well, so the reasons for sleep deprivation vary. And in this episode, teachers will share insights from classrooms around the world. We will hear from Ganiyat Muritala from Nigeria, Rocío García Solá from Argentina, and Kawita Tani from Vietnam. Despite some contextual variations, sleep is universal, and we all need to sleep. To know more about the science behind the link between sleep and learning, today we will be guided by Jared Saletin, Associate Professor of Psychiatry and Human Behavior at Brown University. Let's then start visiting Jared in the USA. Jared is a cognitive neuroscientist who studies how sleep helps kids learn. Hello, Jared. Thanks so much for accepting my invitation.
Thank you so much. It's a joy to be here. This might be surprising given the year we're in, but I've never done a podcast before, so this is all new to me.
There is a first time for everything, isn't there? I hope you enjoyed the experience today. Where are you talking from?
I'm here at Brown University and Bradley Hospital in Providence, Rhode Island in the States.
Jared, what does the science say about the importance of sleep for learning?
We can talk about learning in a very scientific premise, but the reality is most learning kids have to do is in the classroom and it's in school, and kids are tired, and they're tired for lots of different reasons.
As children grow older, it seems that we pay less attention to their sleeping needs. Do kids sleep enough?
When I ask 12-year-olds all the way up till 18-year-olds, are you getting enough sleep? And the majority of them just say no. And they say no at greater volume every year. Kids are aware of this. The most amazing thing is that kids who are not the decision makers for when they need to go to school and how much work they have and the amount of opportunities that are placed on them, kids know there's not enough time in the day and they know that they're not getting enough sleep. What they don't necessarily know when we talk with them, and teachers and parents might not necessarily know, is that it's not just the amount of work these kids have to do. It's also that their biology is changing and that the two of those things are coming together and really squeezing sleep out of the window and making it very hard for these kids to get enough sleep.
It seems to me that we, the adults who plan their schedules and the structure of their learning paths, are not necessarily paying attention to children's sleep needs. A few weeks ago, my own teenage son had a standardized international test for proficiency in a second language, and the test was at 11 p.m. on a weekday. So the results could have a huge impact on his future academic choices and decisions, but the time may not have allowed him to perform at his best.
We tell them they have to show up and it has to be at this time and they have to perform. And it's at the time of their life, which, as you say, the results of that performance can be decisive to the opportunities that they're afforded later in their life. We have this incredibly critical window of time where we ask kids to perform in ways that have consequences for the rest of their lives, and we don't structure their lives in a way that sets them up to be healthy and supportive of those goals.
Can you tell more about those changes in biology and the impact these have on children's sleep and learning as they grow?
Well, let's start with that question of why sleep is important. We spend a third of our lives doing it. We all know what happens when we don't get a good night of sleep. So we all know what that feels like. It's hard to pay attention. Our emotions are hard to regulate. We simply don't feel well at a physical level and at a mental level. Now, the neuroscience of sleep backs all of that up. If you don't get adequate sleep, it could be short amounts of sleep loss night to night. It could be a whole night of staying awake. The memory portions of our brain are compromised. The attention portions of our brain are compromised. And the parts of our brain that keep our mood stable so that we don't swing one way or the other, those regions of the brain don't function as well. So even one night of insufficient sleep compromises those functions of the brain, and we feel it when we try to go out in our lives the next day.
And we are not in the best position to learn. I think parents and teachers and young children tend to be more aware about children's need for sleep. But what about older children? What happens when teenagers don't get enough sleep?
When we talk about teenagers, they're getting multiple nights of bad sleep, and they're getting insufficient or inadequate sleep night after night during the school week. Let's unpack that biology just a little bit. When we talk about kids not getting enough sleep at night, the first thing a lot of people say is, well, teenagers and kids are either lazy or disorganized, and if they could only organize their homework, they could get to bed, and that's it. And it's all behavioral. And that's just not true. When we look at the biology of teenagers, two things happen fundamentally to sleep. The first is their biological clock changes. When we ask questions about when do you sleep, the easy answer is I sleep when I'm tired. But the other answer is I sleep at night, right? But the definition of what night is for you and for me and for our kids it varies individually because we all have a clock in our head. It's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and it runs what are called our circadian rhythms. Like any clock, it has to have its time zone set. And for the most part, gets set by the light-dark cycle around us, which is why when you travel from Europe to North America, you're jet lagged for a couple of days. The light helps you reset. Your biological clock catches up. Well, in adolescence, that biological clock essentially travels a couple time zones. The problem is you're not moving. You're living where you are. When you go through puberty, your clock gets delayed. Maybe by a magnitude of an hour, maybe by a magnitude of 2 hours. That's going to mean that during the adolescent years, you are not jet lagged in a literal sense because you haven't traveled, but you're what we call socially jet lagged. Your brain's biology is living in a slightly different time zone than the world that is around you. You want to go to bed later because that's when your biology thinks it's nighttime. This creates a real problem for schools because we don't set the school schedule around that teenager's biology. You put those kids in those classrooms, the kids are sleepy and they fall asleep in class.
Of course, they are not in the best position to learn, right?
The laboratory data shows that kids otherwise well rested, if you put kids in a room at 8 o'clock in the morning when they have to wake up early, they'll fall asleep remarkably quicker than they should. And I mentioned two things happen during adolescence. The first is the biological clock shifts. The biology changes. It's not just human biology. We see this in animals as they go through puberty and adolescence as well. The second, though, is that the need for sleep that accrues throughout the day accrues in a more slow fashion. And what that means is that even if a child wanted to go to bed at an earlier time, they might not be as sleepy yet. And so these two things come together. And the problem is that we schedule kids' lives in opposition to that biology. So my colleagues call this the perfect storm of adolescence because it really is a conspiring of biological forces and societal forces. And what gets squeezed out is sleep.
What evidence is there about the importance of sleep at this developmental stage?
If you look at the neuroscience of adolescence, kids are going through transformational change with respect to their social emotional lives, who they trust, who they don't trust, who they bring close to them, the risks that they take, how they motivate their behavior. And we want to scaffold healthy behavior for kids, right? We want kids to take risks within reason, healthy risks. All of those functions are altered with insufficient sleep. So we know from studying fMRI studies of sleep loss that moral decision-making, trusting decision-making, reward and risk-taking decision-making are all changed when we don't get adequate sleep. The other thing the data shows is that all you need is 1 or 2 hours of less sleep every night, by the end of a week of that or 2 weeks of that, some of the same deficits emerge in the brain and in performance as someone who spent the whole night awake. So kids, they're not walking around getting zero sleep, but they're walking around getting insufficient sleep. That is carrying forward with them like a debt, exposing them to risk in a way that might be buffered if they could get adequate sleep.
Thanks, Jared. Let's hear from Ganiyat, a teacher from Nigeria, who shares a story about a sleep-deprived student.
I have a girl in my class named Farida. She's 13 years old. Anytime I teach in class, Farida sleeps. She sleeps during the lesson. She doesn't concentrate. She loses attention. I was so worried about this issue at first and looked for a way to help her. I called her, Farida, are you okay? She said she's fine. Everything is okay. But there's still the problem of sleeping in class. So I've learned a lot of things about the strategies. I called her Farida. Farida, there's a new game in school. She volunteered. She said, yes, she's willing to teach me. She taught me how to play the game. In the process of playing the game, I asked her, why do you sleep in class? She said, really, I sleep in class because I follow my aunt to shop. They have a local restaurant that they sell food. And we stay in shop for after school hour, 2 p.m. to 11 p.m. in the night or 12 a.m. I was like, really? Why would you have time to rest? I was so concerned about the issue. I asked her to call a guardian to school. She said no, that she won't be able to make it. So the second day, I went for home visit. I visited the guardian. I told her about the issue, the challenge that Farida is having in the class. How can she help us? So she was surprising Farida sleeping in class, but this is actually the problem. She doesn't sleep after school hour. And he promised me that Farida is going to sleep early, that she's going to get a mat in the shop, and she's going to sleep around 8 or 9 so that she'll be able to be okay. And I was so happy seeing that changes from her because I was able to build relationship with her and see her impact.
There are differences between contexts. Different educational systems organize school schedules differently. In many places, a single school has a morning shift and an afternoon shift, and perhaps even an evening shift, each shift with different students. These shifts are not to accommodate to the biological changes that Jared explained, but to host large numbers of students in communities where there are not so many secondary schools. And also, in some places, children have long commutes. In a community I visited recently, secondary school students had to walk for 1.5 hours on average to get to and from school. So these things impact the children's schedules. Although sleep happens at home, it affects learning in the classroom. Helping children to be well rested and ready to learn often requires collaboration between teachers and families, as Ganiyat's story shows. Let's go back to Jared. I guess not all learners need the same amount of sleep, but how long should teenagers sleep for on average?
There are some of us that are natural short sleepers and some of us that are natural long sleepers, and that's variability. But on average, an adolescent in the later teenage years needs somewhere between 7 and 9 hours of sleep a night, on average. Quality sleep. And even that is outside the range of some kids' day-to-day experiences. So how do you find 7 to 9 hours?
Teacher Rocío from Argentina asks her students how much sleep they get.
I think sleeping is so important. I am kind of like the sleeping patrol. I can tell if the kids did not sleep well because sometimes they cannot even sit properly. I don't know the English for it, but they're like pudding. As a chemistry teacher, I usually see students struggling with my subject, and I realize many times that it has to do with the sleeping time. Many times I ask them, how long did you sleep yesterday? How many hours did you sleep? And you could be surprised because many of them will say 5 hours. And if there is an important part of the subject that I know that it's kind of difficult, I would encourage them to sleep well the night before and have a good breakfast. Chemistry has the applied mathematics in it, and so they need to be really awake in order to understand it.
Thanks, Rocío, for sharing. Back to Jared again. It's not just the number of hours that's important, right?
As important as duration are at least two different other qualities. One is timing. And that gets us back to that circadian rhythm, to that biological clock of sleeping in alignment with your biological need, trying to force yourself to sleep early in the evening when your biology is not there because you're a teenager and it's later and your brain wants to sleep a little later. That's being maladaptive. So timing matters. But the other thing that matters is regularity and consistency.
Regularity and consistency in sleep is important at all ages.
One of the things we get asked all the time is, well, I get very little sleep during my school week and I want to oversleep on the weekend. And at first glance, Nina, the answer is we want you to catch up some of your sleep, right? Because we don't want you to be sleep deprived as a kid. But the caveat to that is trying not to sleep in too much and finding a balance. So I would rather have a child getting maybe 7 hours every single night, including Saturday and Sunday, versus getting 6 hours during the week and then trying to get 11 hours of catch-up sleep on the weekend. Because part of the problem with that catch-up sleep is they'll sleep till 10, 11, or 12 o'clock in the morning. By doing that, by sleeping in tremendously on Saturday and Sunday morning, is not seeing light till the mid-morning. That is essentially going to engage even further misalignment for your rhythms.
I see this with the teenagers in my family, and I remember oversleeping at the weekend when I was a teenager. I can now see the vicious cycle it can create. You are tired because you did not sleep enough during the week, and then you sleep too much on Saturday and Sunday.
Right? You start the week even harder than you would have been. It makes Monday even harder.
So we have these competing needs, the need to get adequate sleep during the school week with the need to catch up during the weekend.
It's about finding some balance. How can we put the most sleep we can put into the school week with the least amount of oversleeping on the weekends so that life can find some balance? That's really our guiding principle when we talk about trying to find healthy sleep for kids.
Given that sleep happens at home and not in school, what can teachers in the classrooms do? Mainly teachers working with adolescents who go through these biological changes.
My wife is a middle school science teacher, and so we have these conversations quite often. And there are people trying to change the whole system, and that's good, but that's slow. So if you're a teacher in a classroom, what can you do? So understanding that there's biology here that we have to accommodate, we have to understand. Then designing what's within your locus of control to accommodate for that biology. Actually coordinating with your other teachers, I think, can be really helpful in understanding how much pressure are we putting on any given child on any given night. I think the other thing is understanding the signs of sleepiness in the classroom. Looking at those kids that you're finding them disengaged, you're finding them hard to pay attention. That might indicate some sleepiness. And then working with that child and with their parents to try and understand, are they sleeping well at night? Are there problems that we can maybe help buffer?
This is what Ganiyat from Nigeria did. She developed a closer relationship with her student to understand what was going on and then contacted the family to discuss the issue and find solutions. Let's now hear to what Kawita, who teaches in Vietnam, shares with us.
My experience working with teenagers is also, I guess, what every teacher must be facing. The effect of that they are sleep deprived is that they are not fresh in the morning. It's a very big ordeal to be able to get up and come to school. And even if they're coming to school, they just want to be lying down, not really active. I see that because they are sleepy in the morning, they have difficulty concentrating or staying awake during a lesson, so they're not able to focus adequately in class. So it does take them some time to get into that active mode. What I also see is because students are staying up later, they are asking me to set deadlines for later, sometimes asking me for deadlines as late as 12 a.m. So to be exact, 11:59 p.m. I'm always very surprised because I tell them, well, as growing children, you ought to be in bed by 10. But they say, no, we are awake until then. Then they will joke with me and say, well, we have to do your work, right? So that's why we are awake. But I always advise them to be doing their work earlier so that they can get to bed earlier. And I emphasize a lot on that it's very important that they sleep on time, that they get proper sleep because they are growing adults. They need that concentration for exams. They have to fare well. And if they're tired, their mind is tired, they won't be able to do so. But this is just advice to them. It's something that most of them do not follow. The other thing is that they learn better in the morning than after lunch. So again, that sleep sets in after lunch.
Do you have a solution in your school?
So for us as a solution, what we have this year, all spoken about as coordinators, we have sat with the management and asked to implement this. We are asking the new school year to change the schedule so that we can have all the passive learning subjects. And I say passive, not because they're passive, but because the students do not really have much input rather than learning or listening to the lecture, so that we can have those in the morning so that they are awake when their brain is active. And the active classes like sports, home economics, all the classes where it's hands-on learning, music, drama, in the afternoon for keeping students actively involved in the learning process. So we hope by doing this that when they're getting that slump after lunch, they really can't function much, that we have those subjects that they won't be feeling sleepy because they'll be active, and the most difficult subjects that we have them in the morning. So we're really hoping that that change is going to be bringing some change also in the students' way of learning. For me personally, I think that's a very effective solution because I think this is a problem that many schools are also facing.
Thanks, Kawita. It's good to hear about educators collaborating to support students. Jared, we have this biological clock, but also different learners might learn better at different moments of the day, right? Can teachers take that into account?
So even though on average all teenagers shift later, some of them are still more morning types and some of them are really evening types. And what that means is some of them are going to be better at 9 o'clock in the morning and some of them are going to be better at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. One of the things that I always have been interested in doing is trying to think of, could we develop a tool that helps teachers understand when in the day a given student should get an assessment?
Yes, please, let's do this. I am in.
We have some of those tools in research. We can figure out what your body's preferred timing, but we haven't translated that to teachers. And I've always sort of hoped that that could be a project that we could do to develop a tool that teachers could use to decide, is this kid a really evening type kid or is this kid a really morning type kid? And then make decisions about when we schedule classes, when we schedule assessments on a kid-by-kid basis.
Yes, I see how that could be useful. This episode is a reminder for all of us to put the child at the center of our decisions about them.
You don't hear often what's the best for the child. And, when we talk about sleep, the evidence is clear about what the best is for the child. And so when we talk about making big policy change, Nina, we like to sort of make the sale pitch at whatever is salient to someone, right? So when we think about all the different things that we can do to improve schools, in the US at least, the conversation is often about smaller classrooms, better teacher training, maybe more busing so that kids don't have to spend as much time on a bus. All of those things cost money. Delaying the school start time, less expensive than all those other things. And it gets the same outcomes and the same benefits. So it's a win-win as long as you can bring the stakeholders on board and kids feel better. And, every place is different. The end goal should really be about how can we maximize sleep for these kids?
What final advice do you have?
If you're a teacher and a parent who feel powerless at the institutional level and feel like they can't change the system, well, then let's focus on the kid. How can we squeeze an extra 15 or 20 minutes into this kid's schedule? How can we organize their morning so they might have to wake up a little bit later and they can accommodate that? How can we organize their evening so they can go to bed a little bit earlier and accommodate that? And if we can just make change on the margin, just change ever so subtly, sneak half an hour in on a day-to-day basis, well, that's going to pay dividends for that kid. And their mental health, their academic life, their emotional life, their learning is going to improve as a result. I'm a scientist who cares about learning. Grades are improved when kids can sleep better in school. Softer metrics about schools improve. So child attendance goes up, delinquency goes down, mental health constructs and just general well-being for kids improves, which makes them happier and healthier and have better adolescent years, which of course makes them better to have in class, easier to have in class. It's going to improve quality of life for teachers. One thing that I leave everyone with is we've done quite a bit of work in public health to elevate the need for physical activity and for healthy eating as sort of bedrocks of health. Well, sleep is really a third pillar on which health stands.
Thanks for listening to Teachers' Voices. I hope you have found today's episode inspiring and insightful. If you want to learn more about our guest today and about the science, you can find information and links in the show notes and on boltscience.org. Please don't forget to follow us and engage with us in social media, leave us a review, or join our WhatsApp community, and stay tuned for the next episode of Teachers' Voices.